"Take me instead," she said as they gave the cowboy a woman he couldn't refuse or return. In the wide stretch of land where the sky felt endless and the wind spoke louder than men, he lived a quiet life shaped by routine and hard work. Every morning, he rose before the sun, washed his face with cold water, and stepped outside to greet the day. His boots were worn, his hat faded by years of sunlight, but everything he owned had a purpose. He believed a man did not need much to live with dignity. The land he worked on was not rich, but it was honest. The soil was tough, the grass stubborn, and the animals demanded patience. He took care of them with care and respect, never rushing, never cutting corners. He believed that if you treated life fairly, it would treat you the same in return. That belief had guided him since he was young, passed down from a father who had lived the same way and asked for nothing more than peace. He rarely spoke unless necessary. When he did, his words were calm and measured. People trusted him because he never promised more than he could give. In a world where many talked big and delivered little, his silence became his strength. Neighbors often said he was too decent for the times they were living in. He would smile at that and shrug, as if goodness was not something special but simply the natural way to live. The town nearby had changed over the years. What was once a small place where everyone knew each other had slowly fallen under the influence of powerful men. Land deals happened behind closed doors, decisions were made without fairness, and those without money or connections learned to stay quiet. The cowboy noticed these changes but kept his distance. He believed that if he stayed honest and avoided trouble, trouble would avoid him too. But life does not always respect distance. One afternoon, as the sun burned low and painted the land in gold, a stranger arrived. The man wore clean clothes that did not belong to the dust and heat of the area. His boots were polished, his voice sharp, and his eyes always watching. The cowboy knew immediately that this visitor did not come by accident. Strangers rarely did. The man spoke politely, but there was something heavy behind his words. He mentioned names the cowboy had heard before, men who owned more land than they worked and more power than they deserved. The conversation stayed vague, but the message was clear. A situation had formed and the cowboy was now part of it whether he wanted to be or not. After the man left, the land felt different. The wind still moved the grass, the animals still made their sounds, but a sense of unease settled in. That night the cowboy sat outside longer than usual, staring at the stars. He tried to understand how a man who had kept to himself could suddenly be tied to the plans of others. In the days that followed, small signs appeared. Supplies arrived late. Neighbors avoided eye contact. A road he used often was suddenly blocked. Nothing was said directly, but the pressure grew quietly, like a shadow stretching longer with each sunset. The cowboy did not panic. Panic was useless. Instead, he focused on what he could control. He worked harder, fixed broken fences, and kept his routine unchanged. Deep down, though, he knew something was coming. Life had taught him that silence before a storm was never peaceful. One evening, another message arrived, this time clearer than the first. He was told that a past conflict, one he had nothing to do with, needed to be settled. His land, his work, and his future had been placed on a scale by people who had never stepped foot on his soil. The terms were unfair, but refusal was not an option. If he said no, he would lose everything he had built. He felt anger rise in him, but he pushed it down. Anger clouded judgment, and he needed a clear mind. He thought about leaving, about walking away before things got worse. But where would he go? This land was not just ground beneath his feet. It was his history, his identity, and his only home. That night he slept little. Memories of his father returned, lessons about standing firm and choosing right even when it cost something. Those lessons had seemed simple when life was simple. Now they felt heavy. Days later, a vehicle arrived just before sunset. This time it did not carry words alone. It carried a decision already made. The cowboy stood still as the dust settled, his face calm but his heart tight. He sensed that this moment marked the end of the life he had known. Inside the vehicle was a woman he had never seen before. She did not look around with curiosity but with awareness, as if she understood exactly where she was and why. Her posture was straight, her eyes steady. She carried no fear on her face, only a quiet seriousness that matched his own. No explanations were given in full, but enough was said to make the truth clear. She was part of an arrangement designed to close a chapter for people in power. She was not a gift, not a reward, but a solution to a problem that should never have existed. The cowboy felt his chest tighten. He had never wanted responsibility over another person's fate, especially under such conditions. As the vehicle drove away, leaving silence behind, the cowboy stood there, unsure of what to say or do. The land felt heavier now, as if it too understood the injustice of the moment. He looked at the woman and she looked back. There was no blame in her eyes, no expectation, only the understanding that both of them had been pushed into the same corner. The cowboy realized then that his quiet life was no longer protected by distance or good intentions. He had been pulled into a world where choices were made for others, where silence was mistaken for weakness. Yet even in that moment he felt something else rise within him, not anger, not fear, but resolve. Whatever was coming next, he knew one thing for certain. He would not let this situation define him without a fight of values, even if that fight was quiet, even if it cost him everything he owned. And so, as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the first part of his true test began, not with noise or violence, but with a silent promise to himself that he would remain a good man in a world that seemed determined to make that difficult. The next morning arrived quietly, but nothing felt normal anymore. The cowboy woke before dawn as he always did, yet his body felt heavier, as if sleep had not touched him at all. He sat up slowly and listened to the sounds outside. The land was awake. Birds moved in the distance, and the wind brushed gently against the walls. Life continued, uncaring of the weight that now sat on his chest. He stepped outside and saw the woman already awake. She stood near the fence, looking out at the open land. She was not wandering or restless. She stood still, calm, as if she had learned long ago how to wait without breaking. The cowboy noticed that she carried herself with dignity, even in a place that was not her choice. They greeted each other with simple words. No long explanations followed. Neither of them knew how to begin such a conversation. Sometimes silence felt safer than speaking the wrong thing. Still, the cowboy felt a responsibility he had never asked for but could not ignore. He offered her water and food, and she accepted politely, thanking him in a quiet voice. As the day moved on, he returned to his work. The animals needed care, the fences needed checking, and the land demanded attention. He focused on each task, hoping routine would calm his thoughts. But no matter where he went, he felt the presence of another life now tied to his own. It was not an unwanted presence, but it was one that came with heavy meaning. The woman did not stay idle. She helped where she could, careful not to interfere, asking before doing anything. The cowboy noticed this and respected it. She was not trying to take space that wasn't hers. She was simply surviving the moment she had been placed in. As hours passed, the weight of the situation became clearer. This was not temporary. The people who arranged this expected him to accept it without question. In their minds, the matter was settled. He felt anger rise again, slow and steady, like fire beneath ash. Not because of the woman, but because of the lack of choice given to either of them. In the afternoon, another visitor arrived. This time, the message was firm. The arrangement stood. The cowboy was told without kindness that any resistance would lead to consequences. His land could be taken, his work could be destroyed, his life could become very small very fast. He listened without interruption. Years of silence had trained him well, but inside his thoughts raced. He had lived honestly, paid his dues, and harmed no one. Yet now he was being punished for reasons that had nothing to do with him. The unfairness of it all sat like a stone in his chest. After the visitor left, the woman approached him. She had heard enough to understand the danger. Her face showed concern not for herself but for him. That surprised him. Most people, when trapped, think first of escape. She thought of impact. She asked him gently if this situation would ruin him. He did not lie. He told her it already was trying to. Still, he said he would not allow anger to guide him. Anger made people careless, and careless people were easy to break. As the sun lowered, they sat near the edge of the land, talking quietly. She shared a little of her story, careful with her words. She had been pulled into this arrangement because she was seen as replaceable. Her voice did not shake when she said it, but the truth of it struck hard. She had learned early that powerful people rarely see individuals. They see tools. The cowboy listened closely. Every word she spoke made him more determined not to become another person who allowed that thinking to continue. He realized that accepting the arrangement silently would not protect either of them in the long run. It would only confirm to others that people like him could be used without resistance. Night fell slowly. The sky filled with stars, but they no longer brought comfort. The cowboy sat alone later, staring at the ground, thinking of paths he could take. Leaving meant losing his land but keeping his values. Staying meant standing inside a lie that would follow him forever. He remembered his father's words again. A man is not measured by what he owns, but by what he refuses to trade. Those words had seemed simple long ago. Now they felt like a challenge life itself was placing before him. Over the next few days, pressure increased. Messages came more often. The tone grew sharper. Neighbors kept their distance, afraid of becoming involved. The cowboy felt isolated but not weak. Each attempt to force his silence only strengthened his resolve. The woman noticed the change in him. He moved with more purpose now. His silence was no longer passive. It was thoughtful, controlled. She sensed that something inside him had shifted, and she respected it. One evening, she spoke again, choosing her words carefully. She told him that she did not want to be the reason his life was destroyed. If someone had to bear the cost of this arrangement, she was prepared to carry it herself. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes revealed the weight of her decision. The cowboy turned to her slowly. For the first time, he allowed emotion to show on his face. He told her that no one should have to be traded like an object. He said he would not accept peace that came from another person's sacrifice. That moment changed everything between them. They were no longer just two people placed in the same space. They were allies, bound by circumstance but connected by shared values. Neither of them knew how the story would end, but both understood that it would not end quietly. As the night grew deeper, the cowboy made a decision he had been avoiding. He would no longer wait for others to decide his future. Whatever consequences followed, he would face them standing, not bowed. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen but powerful, the people who believed this arrangement was finished had no idea that their control was beginning to slip. Because quiet men, when pushed too far, do not break. They choose their moment. The morning arrived with a gentle chill in the air. The sun had not yet risen fully, but the light began to touch the hills and valleys, painting the land in soft gold. The cowboy moved as he always did, quietly, carefully, and with purpose, but there was something different in his steps. The events of the last days had changed him. He was no longer just a man going about his work. He was a man facing a choice that could define the rest of his life. The woman was already awake, standing near the fence and looking out over the fields. Her presence was calm, but it carried a weight of courage the cowboy could feel even without words. She turned when she noticed him watching and offered a small, understanding smile. Neither spoke immediately. There was no need. They both understood that the situation was serious, that the coming days would demand careful thought, and that the choices they made now could not be undone. The truth of the arrangement had become clear. The woman had not chosen to be part of it, just as the cowboy had not chosen to be pulled into it. She had been sent as a solution to a problem he did not create, to satisfy the demands of men who believed their power allowed them to treat human lives as possessions. The thought of this angered him, but he did not show it outwardly. He had learned long ago that control over emotions did not mean weakness. It meant strength, the kind that lasts when storms come. Hours passed in quiet work. The cowboy tended to the animals, mended fences, and repaired tools with precision, while the woman assisted when she could. She asked questions when she needed guidance and worked silently when she did not. Her actions spoke of resilience and dignity. She carried herself with quiet strength, as if she had known hardship and had learned to meet it without complaint. The cowboy noticed this and respected it deeply. It was rare to find someone who accepted circumstances without surrendering to fear. As the day moved toward afternoon, tension became harder to ignore. The cowboy knew that the people who arranged this would soon demand proof of compliance. Their eyes were everywhere, and their patience for resistance was short. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting. Yet within that weight, he found determination. He could not allow injustice to stand simply because it was convenient for those in power. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the land, the woman spoke in a voice calm but firm. She said she understood the danger surrounding the cowboy, that she had seen the threats and knew what the consequences could be. But she also spoke of something unexpected, her willingness to protect him, even if it meant bearing the cost herself. She said softly, "If this is going to ruin you, then take me instead." The cowboy froze. The words struck him with a force he could not ignore. He looked at her, searching for hesitation, for regret, for fear, but found none. Her eyes were steady, her posture unshaken. She was offering herself as a shield, not because she wanted to, but because she believed it was the right thing to do. The enormity of her sacrifice and her courage made the cowboy realize something important. This was no ordinary situation, and this was no ordinary woman. He shook his head slowly, his voice quiet but resolute. "I cannot let you do that," he said. "No one should ever have to sacrifice themselves for my life. That is not how a good life is lived." The woman's gaze softened, understanding his point, but she remained firm in her own conviction. She believed that in some way this was necessary to protect him, to keep him from being destroyed by forces beyond their control. The conversation stretched into silence. Neither moved, yet both understood each other perfectly. It was a silent agreement, a recognition that their fates were entwined not by choice, but by circumstance. The cowboy felt a surge of protectiveness, not over ownership or control, but over her dignity and freedom. He would not allow her to become a pawn in a game she did not understand. As the evening approached, the cowboy made a decision. He would confront the people behind this arrangement, but not with anger or violence. He would use reason, courage, and the strength of his principles. He would demand fairness not just for himself, but for her. The woman watched silently, sensing the shift in him. She did not speak because words were not needed. The resolve in his eyes was enough to show her that he would no longer be a passive participant in someone else's scheme. Night came, and the stars spread across the sky like a silent audience to the events unfolding below. The cowboy and the woman sat together by the fire, not speaking much, but each aware of the gravity of what was coming. The air carried a chill, but the warmth between them was unspoken, born of mutual respect and shared purpose. The land around them was quiet, yet it seemed to listen, as if it too knew that something important was being decided in the small moments of courage and conviction. The following morning, they prepared for what might come. The cowboy checked his horses and equipment, while the woman moved with calm determination, assisting where she could. Each action was deliberate, focused, a silent testament to their awareness of danger and their refusal to let it define them. They were ready to face the people who had tried to control them, not with fear but with integrity. When the visitor arrived that afternoon, the cowboy stood his ground. He did not raise his voice, nor did he show anger. He spoke clearly, stating that no one should be treated as property and that he would not accept a solution that came at the expense of another human being. The woman stood beside him, steady and unwavering, her presence reinforcing his words. Together, they presented a united front, not of confrontation, but of moral certainty. The tension in the air was palpable. The people who had believed they controlled the situation found themselves faced with unexpected resistance. The cowboys' calm strength, combined with the woman's courage, created a force they had not anticipated. It was not physical power that unsettled them, but the certainty of principle, the quiet assertion that dignity could not be bought, traded, or forced. Hours passed in negotiation, but the cowboy never wavered. He spoke of fairness, of respect, and of the need to honor human life over convenience. He did not threaten, he did not plead, but he insisted. The woman's earlier words, "Take me instead," remained unspoken now because action had replaced sacrifice. They were not passive in this moment. They had chosen a new path, one that demanded courage and clarity. By nightfall, the first cracks in the arrangement became visible. The people who had assumed control began to see that their plans were not absolute. The cowboy had demonstrated a strength that could not be ignored, and the woman's presence made it clear that she would not be manipulated. The situation had shifted, subtly but decisively, because two people had refused to accept injustice quietly. As they sat together again under the stars, the cowboy allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The weight of responsibility was still heavy, but he no longer felt powerless. The woman, sensing the same, smiled faintly, and for the first time they shared a silent acknowledgement. They were not alone in facing this challenge. Together they had begun to change the story, and though the outcome remained uncertain, hope had found its place. The night passed, and with it came a quiet understanding. Courage was not loud or reckless. It was the quiet choice to stand for what was right, even when the world demanded silence. The cowboy and the woman had learned that truth. And in that lesson lay the strength they would need for the days to come, as the story moved toward the moment that would define both of their lives forever. The morning came slowly, the horizon a soft blend of orange and pink as the sun began to rise. The cowboy stood outside, his hands resting on the fence, eyes scanning the fields that stretched far into the distance. The weight of the past days pressed on him, but he felt different now, stronger, determined, and ready to act. He no longer felt trapped by the arrangement that had been forced upon him. He knew he had to stand for what was right, not only for himself, but for the woman who had courageously risked so much for him. The woman joined him quietly, carrying a small bundle of supplies she had prepared. She did not speak immediately, sensing that the moment required thought rather than words. Her presence had become a source of calm and strength for the cowboy. She had shown him that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and dignity could shine through. Together, they were no longer two individuals pushed by circumstance. They had become allies, bound by principle and mutual respect. They spent the morning preparing. The cowboy checked the fences, tightened loose bolts, and made sure the animals were secure. The woman moved beside him, helping where she could, offering suggestions only when asked, and performing tasks with careful efficiency. Each moment of shared work strengthened their connection and reinforced the unspoken promise between them, that neither would allow the injustice surrounding them to go unchallenged. By midday, they were ready. The visitor from the previous days arrived, bringing the same air of authority and expectation. He believed the situation had already been decided, that the cowboy would comply as all others had before him. But the cowboy's calm stance and firm gaze immediately told a different story. The woman stood beside him, her posture straight, her eyes steady. Their silence spoke volumes, a quiet declaration that this time no one would be used or traded without choice. The visitor began to speak, outlining the terms of the arrangement, assuming the cowboy's compliance. But before he could finish, the cowboy interrupted, his voice calm but firm. No one should ever be treated as property. No life should be used to settle a problem created by others. I will not accept this, and I will not let anyone else be used in my place. The woman nodded quietly, reinforcing his words with her unwavering presence. The visitor's face hardened. He tried to insist, to explain why the arrangement was necessary, but his words lacked the weight of moral authority. The cowboy did not argue with threats or raise his voice. He remained steady, stating the facts, the principles, and the consequences of treating human lives as tools. The cowboy's calm clarity was powerful because it was rooted in truth, honesty, and courage. Hours passed as the visitor attempted to pressure them. Each demand, each reminder of what they stood to lose, only strengthened the cowboy's resolve. He spoke of fairness, respect, and dignity, emphasizing that compliance through fear was not a solution. It was a crime against conscience. The woman, though silent, gave him strength. Her earlier words, "Take me instead," had been an act of bravery, but now they were unnecessary because action had replaced sacrifice. They stood together, united in principle. By late afternoon, the visitor realized that their attempts to control the situation were failing. The cowboy had not only refused to comply, but had also exposed the weakness in their strategy. They had underestimated the power of moral courage. The woman's steady presence reinforced the message. She would not be moved, nor would she allow herself to be used. The combination of his reasoning and her unwavering strength created a force neither intimidation nor persuasion could overcome. The tension grew as the sun began to sink behind the hills. The visitor tried one final tactic, reminding the cowboy of the potential consequences if he resisted. But the cowboy remained calm, his words deliberate and measured. He spoke not only for himself but for the woman and for every person who might one day face similar injustice. His stand was not loud or violent. It was unwavering and clear. He refused to accept compromise at the cost of another's life or dignity. As night approached, the first cracks in the arrangement became visible. The visitor's authority was challenged not by strength or numbers, but by integrity and courage. He realized that his control over the situation was slipping. The cowboy's silence had transformed into a powerful declaration. Some things could not be bought, sold, or forced. The woman's presence only amplified that truth. Together, they had created a moral barrier that could not easily be broken. The cowboy and the woman sat together as darkness fell, the stars stretching across the sky like a silent audience to the events below. The land was quiet, yet it seemed to echo their determination. They were aware of the risk they had taken by refusing the arrangement, but there was no fear in their eyes, only clarity and resolve. The cowboy reflected on his father's words once more. A man is measured not by what he owns, but by what he refuses to trade. That lesson had guided him through these difficult days, and now it was the principle that gave him strength. The woman spoke softly, acknowledging the cowboy's bravery and her own part in standing firm. She told him that she had never expected him to act without hesitation, but seeing his commitment to what was right had given her hope. Together, they had begun to change the story, and though the outcome remained uncertain, they had proven that courage and integrity could hold power even in a world driven by control and fear. Late into the night, they planned quietly for the next steps. They knew that challenges remained, that others might try to manipulate or intimidate them, but they also knew that they had already made a difference. By refusing to accept injustice passively, they had shown that moral courage could resist even the strongest pressures. The cowboy's resolve had become a shield, and the woman's steadfastness had become a source of light, guiding them through the darkness. By the time dawn approached again, the cowboy felt a sense of calm purpose. He had taken a stand, not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The woman beside him shared that quiet understanding. They had faced a test of character, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, they had shown that integrity could not be silenced. And so, as the land slept beneath the first light of morning, they prepared to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew the consequences could be difficult, but they also knew that some victories were not measured by comfort or ease. They were measured by courage, by standing firm, and by refusing to let injustice define them. That night under the stars and on the open land, they had taken the first real steps toward a life not controlled by fear, but guided by principle and respect for one another. The morning air was crisp, carrying a freshness that promised new beginnings, but the weight of the past. Days still hung heavily over the cowboy. He rose early, as he always did, but today his steps felt purposeful in a way they hadn't before. The events that had unfolded, the challenges he had faced, and the courage of the woman who had stood beside him had changed something deep within him. He felt a resolve that was calm but unbreakable. Today, he knew, would mark the turning point in their story. The woman was already awake, standing near the fence with her eyes on the horizon. She did not move hastily or speak, but the quiet strength she carried was unmistakable. Her presence had been a source of calm and courage for the cowboy, and now it was clear that their bond had grown into something beyond mere circumstance. They had faced uncertainty together, and each had witnessed the other's integrity and bravery. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side, with honor and purpose. As the sun began to rise, casting warm light over the open fields, the cowboy moved to prepare for what he knew would be a confrontation. The men who had forced the arrangement on him were watching closely. Their influence had seemed absolute, but the cowboy had learned that courage, dignity, and moral clarity could resist even the strongest pressures. He worked quietly but with intention, making sure the animals were secure, the land in order, and everything prepared should they need to act quickly. The woman joined him, carrying supplies with care. She did not ask questions or give instructions. Her silence spoke of readiness and support. Together, they moved with a quiet efficiency that demonstrated their resolve. Their work was deliberate, not hurried, and it carried the weight of people who had understood the gravity of the moment. Neither one of them spoke unnecessarily, because each gesture, each glance communicated trust and shared purpose. By midday, the visitor arrived once more, carrying the expectation that everything had already been decided. He believed the cowboy and the woman would comply as others had before them, but he was mistaken. The cowboy met him with calm eyes and steady words. He refused to bow to an arrangement that demanded the sacrifice of another person. He refused to accept a solution rooted in injustice. The woman stood beside him, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering, reinforcing the quiet power of his stance. The conversation that followed was tense, but it was guided by principle rather than anger. The cowboy spoke calmly, explaining that life should not be treated as a series of transactions, and that no human being should be forced into a position of sacrifice against their will. He spoke of respect, fairness, and dignity. His words were clear, deliberate, and measured, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The woman's presence reinforced the gravity of his words. She was not a victim, but an equal participant in asserting what was right. Hours passed, and the visitors' attempts to intimidate or persuade them grew increasingly desperate. Threats were made, warnings given, but none of it swayed the cowboy or the woman. They had discovered a new kind of strength, one that came not from fear or power, but from standing firmly by one's principles. The cowboy refused to allow the past injustice to continue unchallenged, and the woman had shown that courage was not just about words, but action. Together, they presented a united front that could not be ignored. As evening approached, it became clear that the visitors' authority over them was weakening. The cowboy's calm courage and the woman's unwavering presence had disrupted the control they had assumed was absolute. The arrangement they had tried to impose was no longer secure. The cowboy's integrity had created a barrier that could not be overcome by coercion, and the woman's quiet strength ensured that she could not be manipulated. Their resolve had shifted the balance, not through conflict but through moral certainty. Night fell, and the stars illuminated the land like distant witnesses to the courage displayed below. The cowboy and the woman sat together quietly, reflecting on what had transpired. The weight of fear and uncertainty had lifted slightly, replaced by the knowledge that they had acted correctly. They had refused to accept an unfair arrangement, and in doing so, had preserved not only their own dignity but the principles of justice and respect. The land around them was silent, yet it seemed to carry the resonance of their triumph. The following morning, the resolution began to take shape. The people who had orchestrated the arrangement realized that further attempts at control would be futile. The cowboy and the woman had demonstrated that human life and dignity could not be traded for convenience or power. The outcome was not the result of wealth or influence, but of integrity and courage. Their quiet defiance had rewritten the expectations of those who believed they held control. In the days that followed, the cowboy and the woman worked to restore a sense of normalcy. They tended the land together, repaired fences, and cared for the animals, each task a reminder that life continued despite hardship. Yet the lessons of the past days remained with them. They had learned the power of standing firm, the importance of protecting others from harm, and the strength that comes from shared purpose. Their bond had deepened, grounded not in obligation, but in mutual respect and understanding. Eventually, the time came for their paths to diverge. The cowboy would continue his life on the land he had worked so hard to preserve, and the woman would reclaim her own freedom, carrying with her the lessons of courage and resilience. Their farewell was quiet, but filled with unspoken acknowledgement of the impact they had on each other's lives. They had faced a situation that could have destroyed them, yet they had emerged with integrity intact, hearts unbroken, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to live honorably. As the sun set on their shared experience, the cowboy stood once more overlooking the land. He reflected on the challenges they had faced and the courage that had guided them. He knew that life would continue to bring tests, but he also knew that the principles he had chosen to uphold would guide him through whatever came next. The woman had returned to her own life, carrying the same understanding, and together they had proven that courage and integrity could overcome even the most unfair circumstances. The story concluded not with victory in the traditional sense, but with a hard-earned recognition that true courage is found in standing for what is right, protecting others when it matters most, and refusing to accept injustice quietly. The cowboy and the woman had faced the impossible and had emerged stronger, wiser, and unafraid. Their lives would continue separately, yet forever intertwined by a moment of bravery, moral clarity, and human dignity that neither would ever forget. In the end, the land remained, the animals continued their quiet routines, and the sun rose again as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed for the cowboy and the woman. They had discovered the true meaning of courage, not in force, not in confrontation, but in steadfast integrity, compassion, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. And that knowledge would guide them for the rest of their lives, a quiet triumph that no one could take away.